Hello, everyone. My name is Courtney Pollock, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Payroll Year-End and 1099 Processing Procedures in Sage 100 Workshop, presented by Monica Boyer. Before we get started, let's go over some housekeeping items. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise to a minimum. However, throughout the webinar, you can submit any questions you have. If you'd like to submit a question, look for the questions section or the chat section of your GoToWebinar, and we will answer all your questions at the end of the presentation. We're also recording this presentation, and it will be distributed tomorrow afternoon to all attendees, as well as those who registered but were unable to attend. And with that said, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to attend this webinar. We hope you find it helpful in doing your year-end process, and I'm going to hand it off to Monica.
Hi everyone, this is Monica Boyer. You may know me by Monica Byrne. I got married over the summer, so I just wanted to mention that. I'm a Sage 100 consultant with SWK Technologies. I've been here about 17 years and working with the Sage 100 product around 20 years. So I'm going to, as Courtney mentioned, talk to you about the payroll year-end and 1099 processing in Sage 100. So I'm going to go through some slides and then we'll go into Sage 100 to review some things. So as far as an agenda for today, we're going to talk about some key information and dates you need so that you know when you'll be able to process these 1099s and W-2s when the information is going to be available to you. We'll talk about where to get the 1099 blanks and W-2 blanks. So there's a form site that Sage has, and I'll tell you where that is, that you can find them. Accounts payable data verification. So how do we look at that 1099 data before we run our W-2s or our 1099s so that we know we have the right information. And the same thing on the payroll side, verifying that data. We'll talk about the order of events with payroll. So that's always a hot question, is what order do I do things in at the end of the year as far as end of the year checks and those kinds of things. And then we'll get into the program and do the 1099 processing and the W-2 processing right within the program. So key information, these are the Sage 100 required versions to process year end, and there's also some dates in here as to when everything will be available. So your payroll tax updates are happening now via the CLAD system, so that's the Sage Tax Cloud system. So they happen automatically and they're pushed down to your payroll system via a payroll tax update. So you've probably noticed when you go into payroll before that you get a message or a prompt saying that there's an update available. Do you want to download and install that? So before you do any of your processing for year end, you'll want to make sure that that's updated. Any updates that you have received have been applied to your Sage 100 software. And then you're going to want to be on Sage 100 Payroll 2.23.0, and that's going to be released 12/15/2022. So sometime after the time it's released, you're going to need that payroll update because that will include the new information for payroll that's needed for year end. And then as far as accounts payable is concerned, these are the versions of Sage that are applicable that can process 1099s with that miscellaneous form, the other forms, and then now that non-employee compensation form. Those are Sage 100 2022, Product Update 0 to Product Update 2, Sage 100 2021, Product Update 3 to Product Update 5, Sage 100 2020, Product Update 5 to Product Update 6. If you're on a version older than 2020, you won't be able to get the update or the new forms for 1099 processing within Sage 100. And you'll notice that it says plus IRD release. So there's an interim release download, they call it, that's going to be available 12/15. And that's going to contain the new forms and things that are needed in order to process those 1099s. And then Atrix will offer a year-end update, and that's going to be released in mid-December as well. They said before 12/20. So somewhere around the 20th, you should be able to have all the information you need so that at the end of the year, you can process your W-2s and your 1099s. One thing to take note of is in the versions for accounts payable, the product updates, as I mentioned, are applicable. So just make sure you're on the latest product update or one of the product updates that's listed here, 3 to 5, 0 to 2, or 5 to 6, depending on your Sage 100 version. And from within Sage 100, you can find that by going to Help and About. And you'll see like 7.10, 7.00, or .20, and then the next digit is going to be that product update. So you'll want to make sure that you're on a supported version for those updates. So where do you get your forms? You can purchase your tax forms for 1099s and W-2s from Sage's web store. They do have a form store, and that's the address right there, https://checks.sage.com/eStore. When you get there, you'll go to the tax and business forms area. It's in that screenshot in the top middle, and then you'll choose your form. I chose 1099s for this particular screenshot, but there's also W-2 options. And when you do that on the left-hand side, you're able to select your software. So you're going to want to select Sage 100 2016 and newer eFile service. So that's going to cover all the versions up through 2022. You'll notice there's one above it called Sage 100 non-tax service users. That's not what you want. You want the one that says 2016 and newer eFile, even if you're not e-filing with Atrix. So accounts payable data verification, you'll want to check and make sure that your 1099 information that's in Sage 100 is accurate. That's where it's going to be read from. So Sage uses a third-party program called Atrix. It's a software called Atrix, is being used to produce the 1099 and W-2 data. That program is going to read the Sage 100 data, of course, and that's where it's going to get all its figures from. So we want to verify that data in advance. So a lot of my clients will ask me, you know, what report do I use to verify that 1099 data? It's a little obscure to find in Sage 100, so I wanted to make sure to list it here. So you'll see there in the screenshot, I'm in the payment history report, and that's in Accounts Payable Reports folder. You'll find that payment history report, and when you open that, you want to sort that report by vendor number, and then you want the payment types to print. You can do all. Sometimes I just do checks, manual checks, because you don't really care about at this point voided checks, maybe, or credit card transfers. And then I do by period, and then you'll want to check the checkbox on the bottom right-hand side that says print 1099 vendors only. And one thing I should mention about changing your periods, you'll want to run it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. My demo data happens to be in 2025, which is why you see that there. And then what you should get as a result of those selections is what I have on the right. So you'll see by vendor number, I have a list of just 1099 payments. And so those totals for each vendor should match what we see when we go into Atrix. The other thing to check is to make sure your information in company maintenance is accurate. That information is pulled from Atrix as well, like your tax ID number, your address, and all of that comes from Sage in company maintenance, and that's located in Library Master Main. And then you'll want to check your 1099 year that's in AP options and make sure that's accurate. So it should say 2022 at the end of this year, and that's located in Accounts Payable Setup and then Accounts Payable Options. On this very first tab, you'll see your 1099 year, and you'll just want to make sure that says 2022, so you're printing the accurate forms. Payroll data verification, slightly different because I feel most people are verifying that payroll data all year long, and you know it's accurate. Every payroll that you process goes into that payroll data, whereas in accounts payable, when you print something, when you print an invoice, you could potentially not set it as a 1099 invoice. So there is a more risk of user error in accounts payable. But you can use the quarterly tax report, which is in the payroll reports menu, as well as the check history report. You can run that for the entire year to see what you should expect to see when you run your W-2s. So this one's a good one. I get a lot of questions about this from clients at year end, like what's the process? What do I need to do first? What do I need to do after? So this will kind of tell you that process. So before you close your year in payroll, you want to run your last time entry, process, print, and post that payroll. So your last payroll of the year is going to be processed and posted before you close the year in Sage 100 and before you do your downloads and update taxes. Then after that's done, so your final payroll is done, you close out payroll, you're going to install your year-end release. So that year-end release is that IRD we were talking about, the interim update. You'll install that year-end release. You'll install any updates that come through Payroll, and then you do that before you generate any year-end forms. So then you'll do your year-end forms. You can make a backup. You can make a copy company if that's your process to save a backup of that company. And then you can download your tax updates for the following year. And then in the new year, you can enter time in the new year whenever you want. So people could be putting time entry in if that's how you do it, but you just want to make sure not to process that time until after you have closed the prior year and you've applied the new tax updates. And then you can continue moving on. And then after you close that year in Sage 100, you can process the payroll for the new year. Here's where you can find some more information on year-end processes in Sage 100. So this is on the Sage City website. I'll leave that up for a second in case you want to screenshot it and have that address. And then we're going to run through processing our 1099s and W-2s in Sage 100.
Monica also put that link in the chat. So anyone that wants to access that link, it'll be in the chat shortly.
Perfect, thank you. Okay. So we're going to walk through processing accounts payable 1099s and payroll W-2s in here. And I'm going to start with accounts payable. So we did talk a little bit about where you can find the information. So I'm going to go into accounts payable options, as I talked to you about before. I want to make sure my default 1099 calendar year is 2022. That's going to be the year I'm processing for. I also want to go into company maintenance and make sure that I have accurate data in here for this company that I'm going to run them for. So make sure my address is in here. You'll note my telephone number is not in here. So I'm going to put this in because that will forward through to Atrix as well. So any information that's not accurate in here, you'll want to put in there. And I'm going to take this out. This is just junk. And then when we go on the additional tab, here's your federal ID number. And if you have any state ID numbers, you can store them there as well. So our company maintenance is good. We know our accounts payable options are good as far as the year for the 1099. And now we're going to go ahead and process them. So processing of 1099s and W-2s in Sage 100 requires Atrix software. And Atrix software is installed from, you can install it from the workstation setup menu in Sage 100. So it does need to be installed on each workstation. So if for some reason you don't have it or you get an error that it's not installed on the system, that's where it needs to be installed from. You can certainly contact your Sage 100 consultant or your customer account manager, and we can help you with that if it's not installed. So when we go to the Form 1099 tax reporting, it should open like this. And you'll see that we can use newer historical forms, history forms. History means I ran these W-2s or 1099s before. I haven't finalized them yet, or maybe I did, but I want to look at them, run them again. We're going to do new ones today, and we're going to choose our form type. So in this particular company, I only have miscellaneous and non-employee compensation in my form types. So I'm going to choose those and work with those. So I have some miscellaneous vendors. My vendor type to print is all types, 2022 calendar year, that's coming in. And you'll notice that the information that we had in company maintenance is coming in here as well. So I'm going to say accept, and it should move forward. Oh, one thing before I say accept to mention is the minimum year to date. So there's typically a minimum year to date for any of the areas in a miscellaneous form. I don't know yet what those are for 2022, but this is where you would put those minimum requirements to print a 1099. So I'm going to say accept, and then it's going to go through a process. Now, before it goes through this process, you might get a prompt to run an update. If you get a prompt to run an update, just go ahead and run that update. That's an Atrix thing, and it's updating the forms on their end. So I want to, there's three options here. So one is to test drive with my first 25 employees. So if you want to just do a test run with those first 25, run through and see if that works and it looks good, then that would be fine. Or you can test drive with all of your recipients for the 1099s, or you can say, no thanks, start processing my 1099s. If you run through the test drive, It does essentially the same thing as when you process them fully. You'll run through all the screens, you'll see all the forms. However, you won't, if you e-file, you won't be able to e-file on a test drive, and it won't save that file in history as a record, as a record that you can go back to. So that's the difference between the test drive and processing. When you process, then you're able to file through Atrix, e-file through Atrix if you like to. You can print your 1099s, and then you also can save that file. So for today's purpose, I'm going to just process them, and it'll bring in my EIN number from Sage 100, and then it'll ask you some questions. So the first question is, do you use multiple 1099 data files for this one, or do you use a single 1099 data file for this EIN? So that essentially means companies in Sage 100. Most of our clients that I've worked with use a single company per EIN. So we would say, no, I use a single company. If not, you would say yes, and then it would ask you which companies to use for the EIN, and you can add them on. So I'm going to say next. It's going to bring in all my information from company maintenance, so I make sure that's accurate, and then click next. Which type of filer are you? So most of you will be filing for your company or employer. The other option would be if it's a taxpayer filing for you. Click next. If you have any state and local tax items, those will show up here. So your state would show up here along with that tax account number. Same with local. You can add them here if they didn't show up, but if you're doing state and local or it's required in that jurisdiction, they should show up there for you. And we'll say next. Do you have any recipients who elected to only receive 1099 forms electronically? If you say yes to this, it's going to force you to e-file those for those employees because they have opted to only receive them electronically. I'm going to say no in this case. And then it offers you some options as far as truncation. So if you're looking at tax ID numbers or social security numbers, do you want them to print in full on the form, or do you want to truncate them? Normally, we're going to truncate them so that we don't have those, especially if we're printing them, so that we don't have somebody's social security number sitting there on that form. And then would you like to print RINs? So that's just an ID number on the recipient copies that are reported as zeros. So if there's no RIN number, do you want it to be 0? And I'm going to say yes to 0, or you could have it leave them blank. So when we say next, it's going to go through a calculation, and it's going to pull up a spreadsheet kind of form. And that's where we can look at look at our 1099s and determine that everything's accurate. Now the system's going to walk you through checking that information. So you'll notice at the top in blue, it says verify recipient taxpayer identification numbers. And then in the spreadsheets itself, those are highlighted in blue. So I'll take a quick glance, look and make sure my taxpayer ID numbers look okay. They're obviously coming from Sage. So as long as I think everything looks good, I can say next. If there's a problem with any of the information, Atrix will not let you move forward. It'll highlight the information in red that has to be changed in order to move forward. So you will see that. And I think I left some mistakes in the payroll file so that you can see that on that side when we run that process. So then it says check if FEIN is checked. So if the recipient is a business, so therefore you have a tax ID number and FEIN rather than a social security number, then this checkbox should be checked. They should come over appropriately from Sage 100. I'm going to say next. It's going to say verify the recipient's names. So if it were an individual, we would have first and last name over here. Since these are all businesses, we have business names here. So we should be fine. Say next. Oh, this is perfect. So this means I have something inaccurate. So it's telling me the IRS requirement on company name that special characters are not allowed. You can only use an ampersand or a dash, no other characters. So you'll see we have apostrophes and commas in there. It's telling us we cannot have that in there. So now I'm going to say go back and correct. And I'm going to go up here, and in Paul's Auto, I'm going to take out the apostrophe. And on tax consultants, I'm going to take out the special characters as well. So I'm going to take out the comma and the period, and then I'm going to say next. As long as everything's okay, it's going to move on to the next thing. If I didn't correct it appropriately, it would go back and say, it's not corrected for whatever reason. So now it wants us to verify the recipient's addresses. So I can look those over and make sure everything looks okay. If I printed reporting from Sage 100, I could verify against that and go to my next step. Verify all income boxes. So now we're looking over here on the right-hand side of the screen. And so this, I have rents for these two vendors, so I can look and make sure that's okay. I have royalties for this vendor. I can make sure that's okay. If I had any state amounts or anything else, they would be up in the next boxes. So I think everything looks good there. I'm going to click next and then verify your filing state is correct. So you'll see over on the right-hand side, it says filing state, and these are all in California. That looks good to me. So I'm going to say next again, and then verify the amount of the state income tax withheld. So the state income tax withheld, it doesn't look like I have any, but let me go back here and see if there's anything. So it's not highlighting. Oh, it's up at the top. See the little, it's putting totals at the top for you to verify against. And I'm going to say next, because that looks good to me. And we're now going to get into the options as to how we want to handle our 1099s, whether we want to e-file them, whether we want to print them, whatever the case may be. So you'll get this information. Atrix is telling you that if you want to use their complete e-file service, that it's going to cost $2.50 per recipient for 1099s. And they'll do everything that's listed here. They'll do next day business printing and mailing. All copies are maintained in history. All state and federal copies are e-filed. So you'll be able to see, you'll be able to have, basically that's the full suite of products that Atrix offers. So when we say next, this is where we actually choose what we want to happen. Now we only had 3 recipients, right? So you'll see in the complete service, you get print and mail recipient copies. You can e-1099 only recipient copies. So those are recipients that said that they wanted them electronically. You can file your federal 1099s, file all applicable state and reconciliation forms, and then e-1099s available for all reports. So I only have 3 vendors that I'm running 1099 for. So it should be $750, but you'll see it's charging me $24.95. That's Atrix's minimum for e-filing. I'm sure a lot of you have more than 3 vendors, so you'll meet that $24.95, but just keep that in mind. If you don't want to e-file with Atrix, you do not have to. There may be some areas where it's required, but there are some that it's not. So if we go to other options, instead of the complete e-filing, now we can pick and choose what we want. So if we just want to print everything, we can just print them. So this option, it will print the recipient copies, but they'll e-file with the federal government, your 1099s and your 1096, and it'll e-file with the state. So you'll see that that comes up to a small amount as well, but the minimum is $24.95 still. I can uncheck these though, and I can just print everything. When you choose to print everything, you'll get this pop-up box saying that it's not recommended since COVID to not file electronically. But for today's purpose, we're going to not file electronically. We're just because we're doing a demo. But you could go back and change those options if you wanted to, or you can continue on. And then if you don't choose their e-file service, they're going to try to get you to use it again. So that's what this is about, because you could then check yes that you want to do the 1099 e-file service. And then it'll ask you which states you wish to file, if you want to file a state. And then it'll print all of the information for you. It's showing you what it's going to do. So basically, it's going to print everything with the options we've chosen. So I'm going to say next. And then it's going to start printing those forms for me. So this is where you would have those forms from that website that we discussed to print onto. So it's showing it to you on the form, but you're actually going to obviously print on that form. These actually print on blank forms, the 1099s. So I think you'll just get blank perforated forms when you go through that search process in Sage Forms. And then it prints everything on here. So then you don't have problems with the boxes lining up and all of that. So then this one up at the top, it says it's my federal 1099 miscellaneous form. So you'll notice that my vendors are on here. So here's Anders Auto Repair, here's my tax consultants. So all of my vendors are going to be on here, and it's 2 pages long because I have 3 vendors. So I have 3 of these filled out. So this is what would be submitted to the federal government. I'm going to say next step, and I'm not going to print them right now, but obviously you could print them. Some of my clients run through this the first time just to print them so that they can review all the information before they finalize everything, and that's fine too. Here's your 1096 for the federal government with your totals on it. When you print next again, here's your California 1099s. So depending on the state that you chose in the state box or the state that you have chosen, you could have multiple. This one only had 1 state, but here's what I would submit to California with my vendors on it. You'll notice too that I'm using 2021 forms. You'll see 2021 forms at the bottom of each of these. That's because the 2022 forms have not been released yet. So now it's going to go on to the next report, and this one is what your recipients would get. So you'll see that all 4 of these list and there's auto repair on it because obviously each of my vendors is going to get 1 sheet of paper. And so you'll see I have 3 pages here because I had 3 vendors, and I can look through all of those, print those if I want. So I'm not going to print those right now, and we're going to move on to the next one. So this one looks like it's going to be the payer 1099 miscellaneous. So this is for you, your copy. So it puts all the vendors, you know, now you have all 3 vendors on 1 page. And then this will be the California 1096 state form. So that has to be submitted with those California those California 1099s along with this form to the state. Not going to print that right now. And then there's 1099 miscellaneous instructions. So you can, if you print your 1099s and you mail them, you can print the instructions. You should print the instructions on the back of that blank form so that the recipient, so this would be on the back of the recipient form. So you'd put the recipient forms that you already printed in the previous step into your printer and print this on the back. And I say next. That's complete. So now you'll see, here's my history file options. So if I wanted to reprint them, and you'll get this if you go back in and choose the history option as well on 1099s. So I can go ahead and go back into these, reprint them, whatever the case may be. If I'm not e-filing them, and let's say I printed them incorrectly and I want to revise them, something was different, I can go in and reprint them, of course. But once they're e-filed, if you do the e-filing through Atrix, then you would have to correct completed 1099s, which is this option right here. So if I did that, it would ask me if I want, if I've distributed any of the following copies, and I don't have to do that, and it's going to take me back in to run it again. One thing I did want to mention is when you're in these spreadsheets, you notice that I changed things in here, like Paul's Auto Pros, I took out the apostrophe. This will not write back to Sage 100. So if you don't want that to happen again next year, you could change the vendor name. Or if it was a piece of information, you know, maybe the address was wrong. If you change it in here, you also have to remember to go back and change it in vendor maintenance in Sage 100. So once you complete, it's going to ask you, do you want to increment the default 1099 calendar year and accounts payable to the next calendar year? So that would change in the AP options, the 1099 calendar year from 2022 to 2023. So you were ready when you go to print next year's. Obviously, I'm not complete on these yet. I haven't done the final with this, so I'm going to say no at this time. You'll get that option every time you run it. One thing I did want to mention too is in vendor maintenance, you're probably all aware, but if for some reason you do realize that you have a mistake in a vendor that's a 1099 vendor, like this one is, you can adjust that information by going to the 1099 history button. So maybe I'm like, oh, this is wrong. We had another invoice for them. It should have been 1826 or something. I could change that here. That total is what's going to print on your 1099 form. That's what's going to be forwarded to Atrix. Normally the system will populate that information for you as you're working throughout the year, but if you do realize you have an issue, you can change that here. Okay, payroll. So payroll, similar process, only we're going to be printing our W-2s and information like that instead of our 1099s. The payroll processing of W-2s is in the period end area, and it's called federal and state tax reporting. You will want to make sure, of course, that your employee information is correct. I'm not going to install that update right now, but that's the prompt I was talking about earlier, where you could install that update if necessary. And then I would go into my employees, make sure I had social security numbers, all of that. That's kind of a quick check if you want to do that. And then we did talk about reports you can run, the quarterly tax report or the check history report to verify data in your 1099s. So if I go into federal and state tax reporting, very similar to that accounts payable process. So I would choose what I'm filing, federal, state, and then you would choose the form name that you're filing. So there are some different kinds of payroll reporting in Matrix. So you'll see some different forms here. The 943s, you could print them separately, 941s, etc. I'm going to go down here and choose my W-2s. So this is my annual form, and it says use this form to process W-2s. If you were in one of the areas that the Guam or the Virgin Islands that use separate forms, different forms, you could go into those as well. So I'm going to say select. When I select it, it's going to tell me what reporting year I'm reporting in. I'm actually reporting in 2022 right now. I've already closed the payroll year in here, and that's why it defaulted to 2023. If you were a specific tax exempt employer, state and local government, etc., here's where you could identify that you are that kind of employer. If it doesn't apply, you just leave that at none apply. It'll tell you what check date, starting and ending, that it's going to run for. So any check date within 1/1 and 12/31. So it's not your period end date that it works off of, or your period start or end date when you enter a payroll. It's actually the check date that's used for W-2 purposes. Your federal ID number, your address all comes through, just like on the 1099 side. So I'm going to hit proceed. And same options as we saw on the AP side. Do you want to test drive or do you want to process them? I'm going to process them so we can see everything when we're running this demo. And then get started printing or e-filing your W-2s. Your company FEIN comes in. Make sure that's accurate and click next. This is the same option that you get in accounts payable. Do you use multiple payroll data files or just one? So if it's payroll from one company, it'll be a single one. Make sure everything is correct here and click next. Which type of filer are you? Same as we saw on the 1099 side. Are you work for your employer or are you a tax preparer? And then this one's interesting in here. I do have state taxes as far as payroll is concerned. I didn't really have them. I did have California where I had to report it, but it wasn't state taxes on the 1099 side. So here it's telling me in red that my EIN numbers are incorrect for those states. Now I could have those state EIN numbers listed in payroll in my state setup, or I could also have it. There's only room for one state EIN number in company maintenance. I can fix them here though, which is what I'm going to do now, just so that we can move forward. So it's telling me what format it should be in. So I'm just going to make sure that it's in that format so that we can get past this. Obviously yours would be accurate ID numbers for those states. But we happen to have employees in California. We have employees in Wisconsin. So I'm just going to go through and edit those so that they're accurate. So once I don't have red in there, I can go ahead and say next. It's telling me our account number for CA state withholding is incorrect. So I must have missed one. So I'm just going to go ahead and fix that here. Click next. So it will let you know that there's an error before it lets you proceed if it's a critical error. So this is just saying that CA has no W-2 reporting requirements for employment training tax, and that's down below in that section. So if you recorded employee training on your pay, for example, it'll bring this up, but it's not reported in California, so we don't need it. Do you have employees who are exempt from any part of Medicare or Social Security taxes? So obviously you would know if that's the case, yes or no. Do you have employees that are members of the clergy? Do you want to use control numbers on your W-2s? Most people don't, but you could put a control number on there if you want. I'll just say yes so that we see it. And then do you have any employees who elected to only receive W-2s electronically? That's kind of like we saw on the vendor side. So I'm going to say no to that. So here's where we would select what kind of payer we are. So you'll know as a business what kind of payer that you are. And then if the business had terminated for some reason this year, you can check this checkbox and it will report that. If you use any other EIN number, that can be listed if you have an establishment number. So any of this information can be listed there if necessary. And then the same thing as we saw on the AP side, do we want to truncate our social security numbers? And if so, how do we want to truncate them? So now it's going to go through and bring us to that spreadsheet like we saw on the AP side, where we can verify our W-2 information and make sure everything's accurate. So now it's telling me verify employee information. Looks to be like everything on the left-hand side. So like employer ID, employee ID, social security number, last name, first name, all of that. It wants us to check. I'm going to say next. So it's telling me I have problems. So there's things that it doesn't like. So the employee's first name cannot be blank. Employee's last name that cannot be blank. Address line 1 cannot be blank. So I'm going to go back and correct everything that's in red. So here, this should be an employee's last name. So it looks like I have something wrong in my payroll entry area. So I'm just going to go ahead and put in information in here, the correct information. Now remember, if I put correct information in here, this does not fix the data in Sage 100. So I'm going to have to go back and fix that data in Sage 100. And I'm missing an address, so I must be missing an address on this employee record. I can go ahead and put that in if I want to. You can also delete rows from here. So I can remove this row if I'm like, oh, that employee should not have even shown up. You know, so I'm just going to, I don't have to give them a W-2. So I can just remove those rows as well. Just keep in mind that that doesn't remove any data or anything from Sage. It's just from this list that we're going to print from. And so this one, it doesn't like here that the E is there. So if I try to say next, it'll tell me why. It'll say employee first name cannot be blank and must be legal alphanumeric characters. So that means that I can't have the point there. And this is really a first name box anyway, so I'm just going to remove that middle initial. So it's telling me that our employer in our employee maintenance, Jerry and Mary, on the first name, in the first name field have their middle initial. So we want to correct that. So I'm going to say next, and it's going to say verify additional employee information. So statutory employee retirement plan, third-party sick pay, check and make sure that those are checked appropriately for your employees. Verify federal information. So now I'm going to look through here. You'll see there's totals at the top. And I can see all of my information flowing through in what boxes that they're going to fall into. So federal wages, Medicare withheld, Social Security tips, etc. Then I'm going to say next, and you'll see over on the right, it now wants us to verify the state information. So we have California information, so that's why it's having us verify California over here. And then when I say next, it's going to say verify my totals, essentially, verify all other data. So basically it's telling you to look at everything. And then we click next again. And now here we go into that Atrix area again, where we talk about whether we want to e-file or not. So I'm going to say next. Here's our complete W-2 e-filing service. So you'll see that it's $250 per employee if I do the entire thing. Does everything that's listed there. Next, business day mailing, and my cost would be $92.50. If I choose this amount, if I choose to go with e-filing, when I click next, it'll ask you if you want to buy a PDF archive, and then it'll ask you which states you wish to file. You can uncheck or check them. It'll ask me if I want control numbers, and then it'll tell me to review the data. And then eventually it's going to prompt me to log in to Atrix to pay for the e-filing. And you can create an account with Atrix at that time, or if you have an account that you've used in previous years, you can use that account. It'll ask you for credit card information to pay for that filing right then and there. So here's my employer W-2. So you're going to see here that I have different employee in each box here because this is my copy. And then it'll say, please insert the 4-part blank perforated W-2 paper you purchased now if you want to print that. I'm not going to print it right now. And it's going to go. So we're going to walk through the forms just like we did on the AP side. Here's our federal W-2. I'm not going to print it right now. So anything that you print here would be essentially your copies. Like if you want a copy of all the things, because we chose e-filing, all the documents are ultimately going to be e-filed, but we could also print them for our records. And you'll notice that this is using 2021 forms yet because the W-2 form for 2022 hasn't been released yet. And you'll see now it says connecting to the Atrix eFile Center. Please wait. And this is where you would log in. If you forgot your login, you can click the link below, or you can click the link below if you don't have a login or you haven't logged into Atrix before, so that you could then log into Atrix. So that website will be right there for you. Once I log in, I'll be asked to process my payment with a credit card. I'll pay for that filing, finalize everything, and Atrix will do the e-filing for you. And I'm going to cancel the session, of course, because I'm not filing these. And you can tell them why, obviously, if you wanted to do it. And I'm going to say I don't want to try again later. So it'll take me right back to my data. I could print them again. And remember, based on your choices there, if you choose just to print everything, printing everything is still free for W-2s and 1099s. You can still print everything and mail them yourself and not have to pay anything to Atrix. So that's the end of my presentation for today. Courtney, did you want to go through any questions we have?
Yes, we have had a few questions come in, so we can go ahead and get into those.
Okay. Go ahead.
So to start, one of our first questions was around the update that is needed for payroll this year.
Yes.
Yes, so they would like to know, is it a simple update, just like a quick pop-up box where you can activate the update, or is it something more lengthy that they'll need some sort of tech support for?
It depends on the update itself. So the IRDs, the interim release downloads, those need to be installed from your server. So normally someone from our help desk or a consultant would do it. We do have some clients who have IT people who do those kinds of updates, and that's fine too. It's not a full blown product update or obviously upgrade. So those can pretty easily be installed, but they have to be installed from the server. And then the ones that are for the payroll updates, those are going to come right through your payroll software, and you can install them right there. If you need a product update, so you're not on the correct product update to get the forms, that also requires an installation from the server, and we do a backup in advance. So you'd want to contact our help desk or your consultant for that.
Awesome, thank you. And I'm putting our help desk contact email in the chat, so please contact them if you need any assistance. They're happy to help, and they know exactly what needs to be done. Monica, our second question is about the 1099s. So one of our audience members would like to know if you can save the paper copy of the 1099 as a PDF rather than printing it, or just leave it in the history. So is there a digital way to save the file without printing it?
Yes. So if you're actually printing them, it's going to come up with a print screen just like you see in anywhere else you print, and you'll be able to choose a PDF printer. So if you have like Microsoft Print to PDF, you can choose that and print them to PDF rather than physically printing them.
Perfect. Our next question is about resale customers. So how do we get the 1099s for resale customers that are over $5,000 in resale purchases?
I guess I'd have to know which form you use for that. So I didn't go through all the forms, but when you're in accounts payable and you're running the 1099s, you have multiple forms here. So I'm wondering if it falls into the miscellaneous form area for resale. Let's take a look. We can see that in vendor maintenance if we go to a miscellaneous vendor. I don't know that that's considered non-employee compensation. I think you'd need some obviously tax advice on that, on which form it falls into, but I don't think that one, it's not employee compensation, but is it miscellaneous? I guess I can't answer the resale 1099 question. I think you'll have to talk to a tax advisor on what form that should fall into.
And we just had a follow-up on that question. They said resale can be filed on MISC or non-employees, but the data comes from AR, not AP. If that's helpful.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. And Sage doesn't print data from AR. So one thing you could do if you wanted to print them through Sage is you could create a vendor for that particular customer. So let's say this is one of our customers. Oh, I can't use that many, so we'll just say test. So this test vendor, on our test vendor or our customer vendor, we could actually go in and say what they are, business or individual, which form we're putting it on. And then in this 1099 history area, you can put it wherever it needs to be. So you don't actually have to process an invoice to get the information in there. So whatever box you have to put that in, like this is fish purchases for resale, that's probably not it. But whatever box you have to put it in, you could put that amount in. And as long as that amount is in there, even though I haven't paid that vendor, it'll still show up as a 1099 to print. So that would be a workaround in order to print those 1099s for customers.
Okay, and shoot, they're also asking, could they just be added to the Atrix form?
Sure, I think you can add them there as well.
Great, and if you need additional help with that question, if that was your question, in the post-webinar survey that will pop up as the webinar ends, just select, contact me and we'll get that question answered for you. Our next question is, I'm sorry, Monica, I'm not remember exactly where this one at, but they said if the data level is listed at 7.00, what needs to be done? So I'm sure that was someone.
Yeah, I know what that is, and I'll pull up that slide because there seems to be a couple questions on that, so you guys can see that information again. Let me just flip it. So this is the slide, and if it says 00, so like if you go in here and it says 7.10.0, that's actually fine if it's 7.10. If it's 7.00, it has to say 3 here, not 0. If that's the case, if it says 0 and the only options is 3 to 5, then you need to have a product update installed, and you can contact our help desk for that as well.
Great. Our next question is about Sage 2019. So this user is using Sage 2019 Payroll version 2.22.
Yes.
Will they be able to install the mandatory update IRD?
You won't be able to install the IRD. So the IRD is not necessarily for payroll, that's for accounts payable 1099s. But you won't be able to install the IRD because it's only available for 2020 and further. If you're on Payroll 2.22, you can update Payroll independently to 2.23, even though you're on version 2019, because Payroll is not specific to the Sage 100 version. So you can install 2.23 and do your W-2s, but you will be stuck on your 1099s because you're still on version 2019.
Okay.
Courtney, one more thing about that. I have heard that our help desk does have a workaround for users that are on 2019. So if you do have to do your 1099s for 2019, contact our help desk as well, and they may have a workaround for that.
Again, that email is in the chat. It's also simply helpdesk@swktech.com. So they're always a great contact if you have any questions about your Sage 100 software. And then I think this will be our last question unless there is another submission. Oh. Or there was a duplicate question. So our last question, unless we have any additional submissions, Monica, can you repeat where they get the 1099 forms from?
Yes.
And they also want to confirm that you said those are not yet available.
I believe the 1099 forms are available. So this is the website. I don't know if you want to put that in the chat, Courtney, but that's where they're available. I believe the forms may be available if they know what the updates are. So you can check that website and see if they have 2022 forms out yet. If not, it won't be much longer. They should be available after 12/15.
Okay, and I'm gonna put those, I'll put that link in the chat as well in just 1 second. And also, if you want to follow along with any of this information on your own time or get any of these links, a copy of the presentation deck is in the handout area of GoToWebinar. So you can download that and have access so you do not have to go back and watch the recording to get the PowerPoint information in itself. So there is that link in the chat for you now. And I think that's our final question. So if you have any additional questions, please reach out to the help desk, reach out to Monica. Really, any way that you are in contact with SWK, we'll make sure you're directed to the right person and get the answers you need. And then a reminder, everyone will receive a copy of this webinar tomorrow afternoon. And if you know anyone who registered but was unable to attend, they will also receive a copy. So thank you everyone for spending some of your afternoon with us, and we hope you found this helpful and that you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.